A simple kidnapping that should have been easy money. But what happens when outlaws grab the wrong woman? Her true identity will shatter everything you thought you knew about good and evil. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one wearing sheep's clothing. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell. This helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. The black sedan pulled up to the parking lot of Murphy's Diner just outside Bakersfield, California, its engine purring quietly in the pre-dawn darkness. Inside, 3 members of the Devil's Backbone motorcycle gang waited for their target. Rebecca Thompson, wife of federal judge Harrison Thompson, the man who'd been systematically destroying their organization one conviction at a time. "There," whispered Tommy Wrench Rodriguez, pointing to a woman in her 40s stepping out of a blue Honda Civic. "That's her. Same car, same time, just like our intel said." The woman wore simple jeans and a faded denim jacket, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She moved with the tired gait of someone working the early morning shift, clutching a worn leather purse and a large coffee cup. "Looks too easy," muttered Jake Psycho Williams, the gang's enforcer, as he checked his .38 revolver. "Rich judge's wife, working at some dive diner?"
"Something ain't right. Shut up and follow the plan," snapped Marcus Ripperstone, the operations leader.
"Boss wants the judge's wife, we get the judge's wife. Simple leverage. He drops the charges against our brothers, or his precious Rebecca suffers the consequences."
The woman pushed through the diner's glass door, the bell chiming softly in the morning stillness.
Through the window, they could see her tying an apron around her waist and beginning to set up tables for the breakfast rush. 3 hours, Reaper continued. She gets off at 10, walks to her car alone. We grab her clean, no witnesses, no fuss. Judge gets our demands by noon. But as they watched their target work, none of them noticed the way she moved. Not with the nervous energy of a woman working out of financial necessity, but with the precise, economical motions of someone conserving energy for when it would be needed. None of them saw how she positioned herself to maintain clear sightlines to all entrances, or how her hand briefly touched her lower back when she thought no one was looking. At 9:47 a.m., a California Highway Patrol cruiser pulled into the parking lot for the officer's regular coffee break. The 3 outlaws tensed, hands moving toward weapons, but the woman inside the diner barely glanced at the uniformed officer. If anything, she seemed to avoid eye contact deliberately. "See," Wrench said nervously.
"Something's off."
Judge's wife would flag down that cop for help if she suspected anything. "Maybe she doesn't suspect anything," Reaper replied, but doubt was creeping into his voice. Their intel had come from a reliable source, a corrupt court clerk who owed them money. Rebecca Thompson, married to Judge Harrison Thompson for 15 years, worked mornings at Murphy's Diner to help pay for her mother's medical bills. She drove a blue Honda Civic, license plate 7G8-4521, and always parked in the same spot. At exactly 10 a.m., the woman emerged from the diner, untying her apron as she walked toward the Honda. The CHP officer had left 10 minutes earlier, and the parking lot was empty except for a few long-haul truckers getting breakfast inside. "Now," Reaper ordered. The 3 men moved with practiced efficiency. Wrench started the sedan while Psycho and Reaper approached the woman from behind. She was fishing for her car keys when Reaper pressed the barrel of his gun against her spine.
"Don't turn around, don't scream, don't do anything stupid," he whispered.
"Just walk to the black car and get in the back seat." The woman's body went rigid for a moment, then slowly relaxed. "Please," she said in a shaky voice. "I don't have any money. My purse is in the car. Take whatever you want."
"We don't want your money," Rebecca psycho-sneered.
"We want your husband to learn some respect."
Something flickered across the woman's face. Confusion, then something else.
Something that should have warned them they'd made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was too late. "Rebecca," the woman repeated slowly, her voice still trembling. I think you have the wrong person."
"My name is Linda. Linda Morrison."
Reaper pressed the gun harder against her back.
"Nice TRY, lady. Linda Morrison drives a beat-up Ford pickup, not a blue Honda."
"Our information is solid." "Please, I just bought this car last week," she pleaded. "The previous owner must have been Rebecca. I work at the diner. I'm nobody important. Please just let me go." Psycho grabbed her arm roughly.
Save the sob story for Someone Who Cares.
Move. As they forced her toward the sedan, none of them noticed the almost imperceptible shift in her posture, the way her apparent terror transformed into something else entirely. She stumbled deliberately, dropping her purse and scattering its contents across the asphalt. "Clumsy bitch," Wrench muttered from the driver's seat. But as Psycho bent to gather the scattered items, he froze. Among the usual contents, wallet, makeup, receipts, was something that didn't belong. A small black device that looked like a garage door opener but wasn't. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, holding up the device. The woman's eyes widened in what appeared to be genuine confusion. I don't know. It was in the purse when I bought it at a thrift store. I thought it was broken." Reaper snatched the device, examining it closely. No markings, no brand name, just a single red button and a small LED light that blinked slowly. It looked like some kind of transmitter, but for what? "Get her in the car," he ordered, pocketing the device. "We'll figure this out later." They shoved her into the back seat, Psycho sliding in beside her while Reaper took the passenger seat. As Wrench pulled out of the parking lot, the woman sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes focused straight ahead. "So, Linda Morrison," Reaper said, turning to face her.
Tell Stati Uniti about yourself.
"What's a nobody like you doing driving Rebecca Thompson's car?" "I told you I just bought it."
Private sale, cash deal.
The woman said her name was Rebecca, but I never saw any papers. She seemed in a hurry to sell.
Psycho laughed harshly.
"Right. And I'm the tooth fairy."
You know what I think.
"I think you're lying through your teeth." "I'm not lying," she whispered, but her voice carried a strange undertone now. Not fear, but something more dangerous. "But you're right about one thing."
I'm not Rebecca Thompson. Then who the hell are you? Reaper demanded.
The woman finally looked at him directly, and for just a moment, her mask slipped completely. What he saw in her eyes made his blood run cold. Not the terrified gaze of a helpless victim, but the calculating stare of a predator who'd been underestimated. "I'm someone you really shouldn't have taken," she said quietly. Before any of them could react, she moved. Her elbow shot back into Psycho's solar plexus with surgical precision, driving the air from his lungs. In the same motion, her other hand grabbed his wrist, twisting it with enough force to make him drop his gun. "What the foo?" Wrench started to turn around, but Reaper was already shouting.
Pull over. Pull over now."
But it was too late. The woman they'd thought was a helpless diner waitress had transformed into something else entirely. As Psycho gasped for air beside her, she calmly picked up his fallen weapon and pointed it at the back of Wrench's head. "Drive exactly where I tell you," she said, her voice now carrying unmistakable authority. "Or this becomes a very different kind of ride." The terror in the car had completely reversed. Now it was the devil's backbone who were afraid. "Take the next exit," the woman commanded, her voice steady as she kept Psycho's gun trained on Wrench's head.
Industrial District, Warehouse Row.
"You know the area." Wrench's hands trembled on the steering wheel. "Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I think I'm someone whose morning you just ruined," she replied calmly. "And I think you're about to learn why that was a mistake." Reaper slowly reached for his own weapon, but she was ready.
I wouldn't.
"Your friend here is still conscious enough to tell you that pressure points are fascinating things. There are dozens of ways to incapacitate someone without permanent damage. There are also ways to ensure the damage is very permanent." Psycho wheezed, trying to speak but unable to get enough air. The woman had hit him with the precision of someone who'd done it many times before.
Who are you?
Reaper asked, genuine fear creeping into his voice.
I'm Linda Morrison.
I work at Murphy's Diner. I drive a blue Honda Civic that I bought last week from a woman named Rebecca. Her voice was matter-of-fact, almost bored. Everything I told you was true. Bullshit. Waitresses don't move like that.
You're right.
Waitresses don't. She smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. But federal agents on deep cover assignments do.
The words hit the three outlaws like a physical blow. Federal agent.
Deep cover. They'd kidnapped a federal agent. That's impossible, Reaper breathed. Our intel was solid. Rebecca Thompson, Judge's wife, works at Murphy's Diner. Your intel was correct about one thing. Rebecca Thompson did work at Murphy's Diner. Past tense. She quit 3 weeks ago when her husband got death threats from your organization. The FBI placed me there as her replacement when we learned about your surveillance. Wrench nearly drove off the road.
Jure FBI.
DEA, actually. Agent Linda Morrison, 15 years undercover operations, specializing in motorcycle gang infiltration. She shifted the gun slightly. And you just kidnapped a federal agent in the commission of a felony. That's a minimum 25 to life, assuming you all live long enough to see trial. The device Psycho had found in her purse, the one they dismissed as junk, began beeping rapidly. 3 short beeps, followed by a long tone.
What is it? Reaper demanded. Emergency transponder.
Automatically activates when I'm in distress. Right about now, every federal agent within 50 miles is triangulating this signal. She checked her watch. I'd estimate you have about 12 minutes before this area is crawling with DEA, FBI, ATF, and probably U.S. Marshals.
You're lying, psycho managed to gasp out.
Am I? Pull over and find out. Or keep driving and see what happens when federal helicopters start circling. As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of rotors echoed across the morning sky. Still far away, but growing closer. Wrench panicked, flooring the accelerator. We can outrun them. Get to the safe house. Figure this out.
Bad choice, Agent Morrison said almost sadly.
See, the thing about kidnapping federal agents is that it stops being about you and becomes about national security. They don't negotiate. They don't show mercy. They eliminate threats. The helicopter sounds were getting closer now, joined by the wail of sirens in the distance. What had started as a simple kidnapping for leverage had become a federal manhunt.
What do you want?
Reaper asked desperately. Right now. I want you to stop this car, put your weapons on the ground, and lie face down with your hands behind your heads. Do that, and you might live to see a courtroom. And if we don't... Agent Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Then you'll discover why I've spent 15 years infiltrating organizations like yours. Sometimes the job requires me to be very convincing in my cover role. Sometimes that means doing things that aren't in any manual. The helicopters were almost overhead now, and the sirens were getting closer. The 3 outlaws were trapped between the approaching federal response and a woman who'd just revealed herself to be far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Choose quickly, she advised. Because in about 60 seconds, this stops being my operation and becomes someone else's problem. And trust me, you'd rather deal with me. Wrench slammed on the brakes, the sedan skidding to a stop in an empty warehouse parking lot. The sound of helicopters was now directly overhead, and Agent Morrison could see federal vehicles converging on their location from multiple directions. Smart choice, she said, never taking her eyes off the 3 outlaws. Now, very slowly, everyone puts their weapons on the dashboard. Then we step out of the vehicle with our hands visible. This is insane, Reaper muttered, but he complied, placing his .45 on the dashboard.
15 years undercover. That is impossible.
No one can maintain deep cover that long without going native. You'd be surprised what someone can do when they have the right motivation, Morrison replied.
Slowly now. Driver first.
Wrench opened his door and stepped out, hands raised. The federal helicopters were circling now, keeping their distance but maintaining visual contact. In the distance, Morrison could see the distinctive black SUVs of the federal response team approaching. You next, she told Psycho, who was still struggling to breathe normally. And remember, I can drop you again before you take 2 steps. As they exited the vehicle, Morrison kept her weapon trained on them while scanning the approaching federal units. Something wasn't right. The response was too fast, too coordinated. Almost like they'd been expecting this. On your knees, hands behind your heads, she ordered.
Agent Morrison.
The voice came from behind her, authoritative and familiar. She turned to see Special Agent David Chen, her DEA handler, approaching with a full tactical team.
Stand down.
We'll take it from here. Morrison lowered her weapon but didn't holster it. These 3 are wanted in connection with 17 federal charges. The leader, Marcus Stone, has information about Devil's Backbone operations across 3 states.
Understood.
Excellent work. Chen's smile was professional, but something in his eyes made Morrison's instincts twitch. Though I have to say, we didn't expect the operation to conclude this way.
What operation?
Morrison asked carefully. The one you've been running for the past 3 weeks. Posing as Rebecca Thompson's replacement at Murphy's Diner, gathering intelligence on Devil's Backbone surveillance patterns. Chen gestured to the kneeling outlaws. Mission accomplished. Morrison felt ice forming in her stomach. Chen, I need to speak with you privately. Of course.
Team, secure the suspects.
As the tactical team moved in to arrest the 3 outlaws, Chen led Morrison 20 feet away, out of earshot. There's a problem, Morrison said quietly. This wasn't planned. They grabbed me thinking I was Rebecca Thompson. This was pure coincidence. Chen's expression didn't change. Was it? What do you mean? I mean, Agent Morrison, that sometimes operations develop organically. Sometimes the best intelligence comes from unplanned encounters.
Chen's voice carried a strange undertone.
Tell me, what did you learn about their organizational structure during the kidnapping? Morrison stared at her handler, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. Chen, how did you know exactly where to find us? My transponder gives approximate location, not precise coordinates.
Good question.
Chen's hand moved to his service weapon.
Why don't you ask Agent Rodriguez?
A new voice spoke from behind Morrison.
Hello, Linda.
She turned to see Agent Carlos Rodriguez, her former partner from the Miami field office. The man who'd supposedly been killed in a cartel operation 3 years ago. The man whose death had motivated her to request deep cover assignments targeting motorcycle gangs.
Carlos. Morrison's word tilted sideways.
You're supposed to be dead. Death was greatly exaggerated, Rodriguez replied, his smile cold and unfamiliar. Turns out there are better ways to fight the war on drugs than following DEA protocols. Morrison's hand moved toward her weapon, but Chen was faster. She felt the barrel of his gun press against her spine. I wouldn't, Chen advised. You've done excellent work, Linda. 3 years of deep cover intelligence, dozens of successful arrests, millions in seized assets. But now it's time for the next phase of your career. What next phase?
The one where you disappear, Rodriguez said.
And Linda Morrison becomes a very different kind of agent. The federal response, the perfect timing, the convenient kidnapping, it had all been a setup. And Agent Linda Morrison was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies wear the same badge you do.
You son of a bitch, Morrison breathed, staring at Rodriguez. 3 years.
3 years I mourned you. 3 years I've been hunting cartels because I thought they killed my partner.
Rodriguez shrugged.
Grief is a powerful motivator. Made you one of the best undercover agents the DEA has ever had. Singular focus, no personal attachments, completely committed to the mission.
What mission? Carlos, what the hell is going on?
Chen pressed his gun harder against her back. The mission you've been unknowingly part of since the day Rodriguez died. Operation Glasshouse, the largest law enforcement corruption investigation in U.S. history.
Morrison's mind raced. Your internal affairs.
We're something better than internal affairs, Rodriguez corrected. We're a joint task force investigating federal law enforcement corruption at the highest levels.
DEA, FBI, ATF, US Marshals, the road goes deeper than anyone imagined.
And I'm what bait? You're proof, Chen said. For 3 years, you've been feeding intelligence through normal DEA channels. Operation reports, surveillance data, arrest recommendations. Do you know how much of that intelligence never reached its intended targets? Morrison felt sick. How much? 63%. 63% of your reports were either buried, altered, or leaked to the very criminals you were investigating.
Rodriguez's voice carried genuine anger now.
Someone in the DEA has been systematically sabotaging major operations. The 3 Devil's Backbone members were still kneeling nearby, watching the federal agents with growing confusion. Reaper spoke up. Hey, are you guys gonna arrest us or what? Because this is getting weird. Shut up, Chen snapped, then turned back to Morrison. The kidnapping today wasn't coincidence, Linda. It was the final test.
Test for what?
To see who would respond, how fast, and with what level of coordination. Your emergency transponder signal went to exactly 7 people in the DEA hierarchy. Want to guess how many of them are here? Morrison looked around the parking lot. 2 helicopters, 6 federal vehicles, approximately 20 agents. All the right people, all perfectly positioned, all responding to a kidnapping that should have taken hours to coordinate. Someone was already watching, she realized. Someone was already in position, Rodriguez confirmed. Which means someone in the DEA knew this kidnapping was going to happen before it did.
The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow.
If someone in the DEA had advanced knowledge of the kidnapping, it meant they were either working with the devil's backbone or they'd orchestrated the entire operation themselves. The corrupt court clerk, she said slowly. The one who gave them the intelligence about Rebecca Thompson. He works for you. He works for us, Chen corrected. And the intelligence he provided was carefully crafted. Right location, right vehicle, wrong target. We needed to see who would protect Devil's Backbone operations and who would genuinely respond to a federal agent in distress. Morrison felt betrayed on levels she hadn't known existed. You used me as bait without telling me. We used you as verification, Rodriguez said. And it worked. In the next 24 hours, we're going to arrest 17 federal agents, including 3 DEA supervisors, 2 FBI section chiefs, and 1 U.S. Marshal. Based on what evidence? Based on response patterns to your transponder signal. The people who responded immediately are clean. The people who didn't respond, or who responded with suspicious delays, are dirty. Chen finally lowered his weapon.
Congratulations, Agent Morrison.
You just helped expose the largest federal law enforcement corruption ring in modern history. Morrison stared at the 2 men who'd manipulated her life for 3 years, using her dedication and grief as tools in their investigation. She should have felt proud, vindicated, successful. Instead, she felt hollow. What happens now? She asked. Rodriguez smiled, and for the first time, it looked like the partner she'd once trusted. Now you get to choose. Join our task force permanently, or go back to regular DEA operations knowing that everything you've done for the past 3 years was part of something bigger. And them. Morrison nodded toward the 3 outlaws. They go to federal prison for kidnapping a federal agent. Life sentences, probably. Unless. Chen paused meaningfully. Unless what? Unless they cooperate with our investigation. Help us identify which federal agents have been protecting Devil's Backbone operations. In which case, they might see daylight again before they're 90. Morrison looked at the 3 men who'd grabbed her thinking she was someone else, and realized they were just as much pawns in this game as she'd been. The only difference was that she'd been a willing pawn. The question now was whether she wanted to remain one.
You want my answer now?
Morrison asked, her voice carefully controlled. Rodriguez checked his watch. We've got 17 simultaneous arrests happening in 6 hours. If you're joining the task force, we need to brief you on your role in the takedowns. Morrison looked at the 3 kneeling outlaws, then at the federal agents surrounding them, then at the helicopters circling overhead. Everything she'd believed about her career, her mission, even her partner's death, had been a carefully constructed lie. Before I answer, she said slowly, I want to know one thing. Carlos, did you volunteer for this, or were you recruited?
Rodriguez's expression grew somber.
I was recruited. After I discovered that someone in the Miami field office was leaking information about cartel investigations. When I started asking questions, they tried to have me killed. Internal Affairs faked my death and brought me into Glass House. So you never had a choice either. Not really. It was join the investigation or become a casualty of it. Morrison nodded, then walked over to where Reaper knelt with his hands behind his head.
Marcus Stone.
You've been running Devil's Backbone operations for what, 5 years? 6, he replied warily. In those 6 years, how many times have your operations been mysteriously compromised? Raids that happened just after you moved locations, arrests that came just after you changed plans. Reaper's eyes narrowed. More than we liked. We figured we had rats in the organization. You did have rats.
Just not the kind you thought.
Morrison crouched down to his eye level.
Tell me something, Marcus.
Who first suggested kidnapping Rebecca Thompson? That came from higher up.
Club presidentesse idea.
Did it? Or did someone plant the idea? Maybe someone who knew Rebecca Thompson had quit her job and that a federal agent had taken her place. The realization dawned on Reaper's face. We were set up. You were all set up. By someone who needed devil's backbone to commit a federal crime serious enough to justify a massive law enforcement response. Someone who wanted to see which federal agents would respond properly and which ones wouldn't.
Chen stepped forward. Agent Morrison, where are you going with this?
Morrison stood and faced her handler. I'm going where any good investigator goes when the evidence doesn't add up. David, you said my transponder signal went to 7 people in the DEA hierarchy. How many of those 7 are here right now? 4.
And the other 3?
They had various reasons for not responding immediately. Or they were warned not to respond. Because they're your targets. Morrison felt the pieces clicking into place. This entire operation was designed to catch corrupt agents in the act of not doing their jobs. But there's one problem with that theory. What problem? Morrison drew her weapon, not pointing it at anyone but making it clear she was ready to use it. The problem is that it's too neat.
Too perfect.
Corrupt agents don't just ignore emergency calls from undercover operatives. They find ways to compromise the operations without leaving fingerprints.
Rodriguez tensed.
Linda, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Glasshouse isn't what you think it is. I'm suggesting that whoever's really running this investigation has been playing both sides. She looked at Chen. Tell me, David, who authorized placing me at Murphy's Diner? That's classified. Classified from whom? I'm the agent who was placed there. I have a right to know who made that decision. Chen and Rodriguez exchanged glances. It was a quick look, barely perceptible, but Morrison caught it. The look of co-conspirators who just realized their cover was blown. The authorization came from Assistant Director Helen Vasquez, Chen said finally. Morrison smiled grimly. Interesting. Because Assistant Director Helen Vasquez died in a car accident 4 months ago. I attended her funeral. The parking lot fell dead silent except for the sound of helicopter rotors. The 3 outlaws watched in fascination as federal agents turned their weapons on each other. So here's my question, Morrison continued. Who are you really working for?
And what is the real purpose of Operation Glasshouse?
The answer would change everything she thought she knew about justice, corruption, and the thin blue line that separated law enforcement from the criminals they pursued.
Drop your weapons.
Agent Morrison commanded, her gun now trained directly on Chen. Both of you, slowly place your firearms on the ground. Rodriguez laughed, but it was a sound without humor.
Linda, you're making a serious mistake. We're the good guys here. Good guys don't operate under the authority of dead supervisors.
Good guys don't fake their partner's death for 3 years. And good guys sure as hell don't use unsuspecting agents as bait without their consent. The tactical team members were looking at each other uncertainly, unsure whose orders to follow. The situation had devolved into a 3-way standoff between Morrison, her supposed handlers, and a group of federal agents who were now questioning everything they'd been told. Agent Morrison, came a new voice from behind the federal vehicles. Stand down immediately. A woman in her 50s walked into the parking lot, flanked by 6 agents Morrison didn't recognize. She wore a DEA jacket, but her bearing suggested someone much higher up the federal food chain. Assistant Director Patricia Wells, Internal Affairs, the woman announced.
Agent Morrison, lower your weapon.
That's a direct order. Morrison kept her gun steady. With respect, ma'am, I'd like to see some identification. The last assistant director I was told about turned out to be dead. Wells smiled approvingly. Smart. Very smart. She produced her credentials, tossing them to Morrison's feet. Check them. Call the number on the badge if you want verification. Morrison glanced down at the credentials without taking her eyes off Chen and Rodriguez. The ID looked legitimate, but after the past hour, she wasn't taking anything at face value. Here's what really happened, Wells continued. 3 years ago, Agent Rodriguez discovered evidence of massive corruption in multiple federal agencies. Instead of reporting it through normal channels, which we now know were compromised, he contacted Internal Affairs directly. We faked his death to protect him while he helped us build cases against the corrupt agents.
And Operation Glasshouse?
Morrison asked. Is real. But it's not being run by Chen and Rodriguez. They're targets of the investigation, not investigators. Wells gestured to the two men. Carlos Rodriguez died 3 years ago, just like you were told. The man standing there is Lieutenant Marcus Delgado, formerly of the Colombian National Police, currently working for the Medellin cartel.
The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow.
The man she'd thought was her resurrected partner was actually a cartel operative who'd been playing the role for 3 years. And Agent Chen, she asked. David Chen is exactly who he claims to be. But he's been feeding information to cartel operations for the past 5 years. The reason your intelligence reports were buried or leaked is because Chen was the one burying and leaking them. Morrison felt vindicated and betrayed simultaneously. Her instincts had been right. Something had been wrong with the entire operation. But the scope of the deception was staggering. The 3 outlaws, Wells continued, were genuinely trying to kidnap who they thought was Rebecca Thompson. But the intelligence that led them to target her came from Chen, who knew you'd been placed at the diner. This was supposed to be your death, Agent Morrison.
A kidnapping gone wrong, a federal agent killed in the line of duty.
But it backfired, Morrison realized. Spectacularly. Because you're better at your job than they expected. Instead of being a victim, you turned the tables and exposed the entire operation.
Chen suddenly lunged for his weapon, but Morrison was ready. Her first shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second shot shattered his wrist as he tried to grab his gun with his offhand. Rodriguez or Delgado was already running, sprinting toward one of the helicopters. Morrison tracked him with her weapon, but Wells put a hand on her arm. Let him run. We've been tracking his movements for months. He won't get far. True to her prediction, federal agents from the helicopter team tackled Delgado before he reached the aircraft. Within minutes, both conspirators were in custody. What happens now? Morrison asked. Wells looked at the 3 Devil's Backbone members, who were still kneeling with their hands behind their heads, having watched the entire federal law enforcement drama unfold. Now weekly and house. 17 corrupt agents arrested, 3 cartel operatives exposed, and one of the best undercover agents in federal service gets a choice about her future. What kind of choice? The kind where you decide whether you want to keep being Linda Morrison, the inner waitress and undercover the agent, or become something else entirely. Morrison looked around the parking lot at the helicopters, the federal vehicles, the arrested conspirators, and the 3 outlaws who they accidentally triggered the exposure of one of the largest law enforcement corruption scandals in US history. Something else sounds good, she said finally. Something honest. 6 months later, Agent Linda Morrison stood before a congressional subcommittee, delivering testimony that would reshape federal law enforcement oversight for generations. The Glass House investigation had ultimately exposed corruption in 17 different agencies, leading to 127 arrests and the complete restructuring of interagency communication protocols. Agent Morrison, the committee chairman, asked, in your professional opinion, how long has this corruption network been operating? Based on the evidence we uncovered, at least 8 years. Possibly longer. Morrison's voice was steady, professional. The network used a combination of legitimate federal agents who had been compromised and foreign operatives who had infiltrated federal agencies using sophisticated false identities. And the 3 individuals who initially kidnapped you, what was their ultimate fate? Morrison allowed herself a small smile. Marcus Stone, Jake Williams, and Tommy Rodriguez, the real Tommy Rodriguez, not a cartel operative, were given significant sentence reductions in exchange for their cooperation. Their testimony helped us map the entire corruption network. Are they still incarcerated? Stone is serving 8 years at a minimum security facility and is enrolled in a college degree program. Williams and Rodriguez were released after 18 months and are currently in witness protection. All 3 have provided invaluable intelligence about how federal corruption affects street-level criminal organizations. What Morrison didn't tell the committee was that she personally visited all 3 men during their incarceration. Schide wanted to understand how criminals viewed law enforcement corruption, and their insights had been sobering. You know what the worst part was? Stone had told her during one visit. We always knew some cops were dirty. But we thought it was individual choices, guys who needed money or got into debt. We never imagined it was systematic. Made was realized we were just small team players in someone else's big team game. After her congressional testimony, Morrison walked out of the Capitol building into bright Washington sunshine. Her phone was with a text from Assistant Director Wells. Impressive testimony. Ready for your next assignment. Morrison looked at the message and smiled. Her next assignment was unlike anything she'd done before. She was joining a new interagency task force dedicated to preventing the kind of systematic corruption that Glasshouse had exposed. Instead of going undercover to catch criminals, she'd be working to ensure that federal law enforcement remained trustworthy. Agent Morrison. The voice came from behind her. She turned to see a man in his 60s wearing a perfectly tailored suit and a military bearing that screamed federal authority. Deputy Director James Harrison, FBI, introduced himself. I've been following your work. Impressive doing begin to cover it. Thank you, sir. I have a proposition for you. A new position that don't officially exist yet, reporting directly to the Attorney General. Interested? Morrison considered the offer. For 3 years, she'd lived as someone else, fighting battles she didn't fully understand. For 6 months, she'd helped clean up the mess those battles had created. Now she had a chance to help prevent future messes entirely. What kind of position? The kind where you make sure what happened to you never happens to another federal agent. The kind where you help rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve. Harrison's smile was genuine. The kind where Linda Morrison gets to be herself while making a real difference. Morrison talked about the 3 outlaws who'd accidentally changed her life, about the corrupt agents who'd manipulated her grief, and about the countless federal agents who did their jobs honestly every day without recognition. I'm interested, she said. Excellent. One more thing, this position comes with a partner. Someone with extensive experience in corruption investigations. A familiar figure stepped out from behind a nearby column, and Morrison's breast caught in her throat. It was the real Carlos Rodriguez, older, scarred, but unmistakably alive. Hello, partner, said with the grins she remembered from their Miami days. Ready to save law enforcement from itself. Morrison felt tears she didn't know she'd been holding back. The real Carlos. Her actual partner, not a cartel operative wearing his face. The man who supposed had driven her to 3 years of dangerous undercover work. You son of a bitch, she said, then hugged him fiercely. I mourned you. I blamed myself for your death. I know. I'm sorry. But it was the only way to keep both of us alive long enough to build the case. Carlos held her at arm's length, studying her face. Linda, you've become one of the best agents I've ever seen. What you accomplished in those 3 years, it was extraordinary. What you accomplished was getting manipulated by cartel operatives. What you accomplished was staying true to your principles even when everything around you was corrupted. That's why you're perfect for this new position. Deputy Director Harrison cleared his throat. If you're both finished with the reunion, we have work to do. Agent Morrison, your first assignment is already waiting. What kind of assignment? Harrison handed her a sick file folder. 3 weeks ago, a motorcycle gang in Nevada kidnapped someone they thought was a civilian contractor. Turns out it was an undercover ATF agent. Sound familiar? Morrison opened the file and saw photos of a desert town that looked remarkably similar to the place where her own ordeal began. Let me guess, the response to his emergency signal revealed corruption in the ATF. Exactly. And unlike your situation, this agent didn't manage to turn the tables on his kidnappers. Is still missing, and we don't know if the people supposed to be looking for him are actually trying to find him or insurers never found.
Exactly. And unlike your situation, this agent didn't manage to turn the tables on his kidnappers. He's still missing, and we don't know if the people supposed to be looking for him are actually trying to find him or ensure he's never found. Morrison closed the file and looked at Carlos. Partner, looks like we've got work to do. As they walked away from the Capitol building, Morrison reflected on the strange chain of events that had brought her to this moment. A case of mistaken identity had led to the exposure of massive federal corruption, which had led to congressional testimony, which had led to a new career fighting the very corruption that had nearly killed her. Sometimes the wrong woman in the wrong place at the wrong time turned out to be exactly the right person for the job. This story proves that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that sometimes being the wrong target leads to being the right solution. Agent Linda Morrison's journey from grief-stricken agent to corruption fighter shows us that our greatest challenges often prepare us for our most important missions. If this story inspired you, remember, sometimes what feels like the worst thing that could happen is actually preparation for the best thing you'll ever do. The skills you build surviving deception and betrayal become the tools you need to fight for justice and truth. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share this with someone who believes that good people can triumph over corruption. Help us spread stories of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable power of doing what's right, even when everything around you seems wrong.